Now, are our universities racist? As the Prime Minister calls on them to account for the underrepresentation of black students on their campuses, there was new pressure today from supporters of the Rhodes Must Fall campaign, who stepped up their efforts to force the removal of a statue of colonialist Cecil Rhodes on the portals of Oriel College, Oxford. In a moment, we'll be debating just how deep concerns go about the racial outlook of our institutions of higher learning. But first, here's Simeon Brown with this report.
He's been dead over 100 years, but Cecil Rhodes is still creating division. The architect of colonialism in southern Africa is enshrined here, in stone, at his old university. But for the class of 2016, meeting here, a man whose legacy includes pillage and plunder has no place adorning one of the world's greatest institutions. This room is an unusual picture for the university. Some here joke that this is all the black students Oxford has. It's not. But David Cameron criticised the university for failing to recruit more qualified minority students. Mobeen says he was the only black British student on the last intake into Oxford's Oriel College.
It's quite bizarre, really. I mean, coming from London, which is quite a multicultural background, to come here and to feel like you are the only representative, and knowing that there are schools which produce more than one student who come to my college in a year group of 100, it does feel like there is something that has gone wrong at some stage in the process.
Mobeen is smart enough for Oxford, but new figures released today suggest that gifted black students like Mobeen stand to earn less than their white peers. According to the Trade Union Congress, the gap in earnings between black and white workers grows as black workers become more qualified. Black workers with only GCSEs earn 11% less than their white counterparts. This wage gap grows to 14% for those with A-levels, a divide that further rises to a staggering 23% for those with a degree. So is this campaign wrongly focusing on the past instead of racial inequalities in pay, which impact students today?
See, I think it's weird that people are kind of asked, why don't you focus on this, why don't you focus on that? Because like I said, it's the issues aren't separate.
When you see a black person, the whole of society feeds you this one notion of who we are, and it's not conducive to us being paid the same. It's not conducive to us staying out of jail. When a policeman sees you, they have the same narratives. It's all about changing the way that black people are perceived in this country.
So for Andre, better representation matters. He says he doesn't fit the Oxford archetype, but for these students who might, do they believe there is a problem?
Or perhaps there's a kind of so-called implicit bias where people maybe just judge without thinking based on preconceived notions.
It's really, really quite obvious that it's largely white dominated, and I was quite shocked by that when I came here.
The white tie and collar is the closest thing the establishment has to a uniform. In these parts, they're facing demands to make an alteration so others can fit in. According to some, life at Oxford would be easier if you look like a member of the Bullingdon Club. But championing diversity and tackling racial inequality is a challenge that goes way beyond this university. Across the country, black graduates earn less than their white peers. So the challenge is ensuring the fruits of privilege are shared fairly.
Well, joining me now are the Oxford PhD student Adam Elliott-Cooper, who supports the Rhodes Must Fall campaign to remove the Cecil Rhodes statue at Oriel College, Oxford, and the writer and educationalist Toby Young, who believes the real problem is that too few black students apply to Oxford University. Thank you very much to both of you for coming in. So let me start with this quote here from the Rhodes Must Fall campaign, who kind of took their campaign to DEFCON 3, if you like. The first point is, first, we want a reckoning. We want Oxford to acknowledge and confront its role in the ongoing physical and ideological violence of empire. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I certainly do. I think it's important for us to remember that the Rhodes Must Fall campaign began in Cape Town, South Africa. And it's a kind of a continuation of the racial justice campaigning that took place in South Africa over previous decades. And this is really a solidarity movement.
That's quite a strong statement, isn't it? So do you agree with that particular statement?
Yes, I certainly do agree with it. I think that Oxford is implicated in the legacies of empire a great deal. I think that the legacy of Rhodes is one of those.
But the ongoing physical and ideological violence of empire, ongoing?
Well, if we think about the ways in which modern corporations such as the oil industry. Shell invests a great deal in Oxford University, and of course they are implicated in forms of imperialism in places like Nigeria and elsewhere on the continent. So I think it is important to recognise the ways in which Western dominance continues to shape African economies and political life to this day.
OK, so Toby's gone way beyond the statue.
Yeah, you know, like most people, I think, who went to Oxford, I'm quite sceptical about the Rhodes Must Fall campaign. I don't see why Rhodes should be singled out and not other historical figures who have views we would now disapprove of, like Churchill, like Gandhi. What about Hadrian's Wall? If Rhodes must come down because we disapprove of Rhodes for being a colonialist, why not Hadrian's Wall, which was, after all, built by a colonial empire? But
is it legitimate to use Rhodes to kind of broaden out the debate the way that Adam has done, to not just talk about the statue or historical figures, but the kind of racial balance of the global economy, if you like?
Well, I don't quite... It feels like they're trying to lever too much into this particular debate and make Rhodes stand for too much. And I think the problem with singling out Rhodes and mounting this campaign in Oxford and accusing Oxford of effectively endorsing Rhodes's views and imperialism in general is that it puts off black applicants from applying to Oxford. In 2013, only 35 black British Caribbean applicants applied to Oxford. Even if Oxford had admitted every single black African Caribbean applicant, British Caribbean applicant, they would still only constitute 1.3% of the total student population.
What's your response to that?
Well, I think there's two things. The first one is that I think that racial justice campaigns at Oxford University deter applicants to Oxford in the same way as racial justice campaigns in Britain deter immigration. They don't at all. In fact, they create a culture that shows there's vibrance, and I think that people applying to Oxford have to be quite naive to think it's some kind of racial utopia before they apply. I think the other thing is that all of these things around statistics and what have you, I recently read a report that was written by Oxford University called 100 Black Voices about black students' experiences, and one of them recounts a photo shoot on their, at their college. And upon seeing the people who were involved in the photo shoots, one of the tutors said, "Oh, brilliant, a woman and an ethnic." And I think that experience kind of speaks to the kind of reductive, somewhat superficial approach to kind of putting a few black faces in high places, rather than the fundamental changes that the campaign
OK, well,
wants.
the Prime Minister himself was weighed in on this. I mean, he wrote an article the weekend in the Sunday Times that basically black Britons are underrepresented in British universities. This is disgraceful and something must be done about it. Well, this is the Prime Minister.
It's not true if you enlarge the category to include black and minority ethnic students. Something like 20% of students at higher education institutions across the United Kingdom are black or minority ethnic, and in the 2011 census, the percentage of the British population, which was BME, was about 13%. At Oxford, the percentage of undergraduates who are black or minority ethnic is around 14%, which reflects the percentage at Russell Group universities if you strip out the Russell Group universities in London. So there's no evidence, if you enlarge the category to include black and minority ethnic students in general, to think that that Oxford is guilty of racism, Russell Group universities are guilty of racism, or the higher education sector at large is guilty of racism.
Would you argue with those numbers?
Well, I guess there's a couple of things. The first is that it's important to point out that 10% of that 13 to 14% of minority ethnic students are Indian and Chinese, rather than being Bangladeshi, Pakistani or African Caribbean. And I think the other thing that it's important to point out is that this campaign is really about not having a few black faces in high places, because black people have been attending Oxford since the 18th century. There's nothing really new about that. But it's about really fundamentally changing the institutional culture.
As they have in the United States, basically putting in a quota?
I think that affirmative action in the United States has made African Americans an intellectual powerhouse in the world, and I think that Britain would benefit from that a great deal.
Very briefly.
You can't impose ethnic-based quotas.
They have in America. It seems to have worked.
But it's against the Equalities Act, which Labour brought in 2010. I think Oxford... The reason Oxford isn't racist is because Oxford is ferociously intellectually snobbish. Oxford wants the brightest students to apply, regardless of ethnic background, religious affiliation, or gender. And can I just get a plug-in for the unique Oxford summer schools? The closing application date is this Wednesday. If you come from a disadvantaged background, if you're at a school which doesn't have a track record of sending kids to Oxford, apply for a place. There are 875 places. It runs throughout July. It's entirely free. You get to spend a week living in an Oxford college and being taught how to perform well in the aptitude tests and in the Oxford interview. The Oxford Outreach does an enormous amount to try and encourage people from disadvantaged backgrounds to apply.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Toby Young, Adam Elliott-Cooper, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.